agus fáilteoirí gach duine. Gur bhíonn mágah as a Lynn and look at Léamh agus Gardan Lynam. Hello everyone, Liam Feely is my name. For anyone who doesn't know me, I'm the Chief Executive of Mountaineering in Ireland. 5 months now, so go easy on me tonight. First of all, it's my absolute pleasure to introduce the evening for a phenomenal award and for a phenomenal evening and for on behalf of Phenomenal Man and for another Phenomenal Man. I know a number of faces in the audience. I've happily met people coming in and out the door. Hopefully I'll be able to meet a few more afterwards. Please do come up and say hello. I've heard a lot of names from staff and board and different people over the last while, so it's lovely to put face to the name. All the legends that are in the room that have walked past me, and probably future legends as well, so it's great. I know a lot of people have travelled far and wide tonight, and that's really appreciated, and look, I don't blame you for what's in store. It's going to be a great evening, but well done and thank you for coming. Just a small admin point from people to let you know that after this, Lombard's pub, I'm not sure which way it is, but Lombard's pub, which is the closest pub to here, we'll be frequenting afterwards, so again, if someone wants to join us for a pint afterwards, you're very welcome. I want to give a very special welcome to Ruth and the Lynam clan. It's always an absolute pleasure to have you, and you know that's what the night's for, so thank you so much for coming in your numbers, and it's great. I suppose I'm very conscious there's a lot of Mountaineering Ireland members in the audience, and hopefully some non-members who will be members soon. I just want to take the opportunity while I have the couple of minutes to say thank you very much for your support. It really is appreciated, and at the end of the day, we're a national governing body, but at our heart is our membership, and everything we do is for our membership, so thank you. I also see, I had the pleasure of bumping into Dr. Una May, CEO of Sport Ireland, on the way in, so thank you Una and the Sport Ireland colleagues for attending. Just so people realise, Sport Ireland do give us a lot of support and are good friends, so thank you very much. And again, before I forget, I think it's very, very important, I want to thank my own team, the staff of Mountaineering Ireland and the board of Mountaineering Ireland. And I want to give special thanks, and I know Dermot will probably echo this, to Quillan McDade. Quillan, Quillan, as many of you will know, is our new hill walking and events officer, and is absolutely knocking it out of the park. She's brilliant, and she's essentially organised this event by herself, so thank you so much, Quillan, well done. We've had a very busy year of Mountaineering Ireland. Thankfully I've come in and seen so much good work. It's been a lot of change and transition, most of which is very and extremely positive. For example, Quillan's new position, which is brilliant for the hill walking and hiking community. We've also got a high performance coordinator in place to really look after that space, which is really, really positive. There's a number of other things, and I suppose everything's at the heart of growing our sport of hill walking and hiking. In 2025, we have a lot of plans, and it's all very positive, and again, it's for increased offerings for our members, tackling important access and conservation issues, which are so important, and something we take very seriously. And I suppose driving the participation in climbing and hiking in the outdoors in Ireland, which is ever growing, and we can see that every day. So that's on our agenda, and it's very important to us. And I suppose while I'm looking forward, it's very important that I look where we came from. And the growth of mountaineering in Ireland is due to several people, but especially due to some incredible personalities who instill a sense of adventure and wonder in mountaineering. David Pollard, our chair, in a while after Dermot will discuss the incredible Joss Lynam and his legacy later, so I won't steal his thunder. But it's due to the likes of Joss and his exceptional representation of mountaineering that inspire others. I'm delighted to be in the privileged position to add Dermot Somers to that. I suppose a number of weeks back I was very honoured to be part of a committee to select the recipient, and I was even more honoured to be able to make my very first conversation with Dermot a conversation which was asking him for the privilege of being our Lynam Lecture recipient. And I suppose one thing that I took from that conversation, and again Dermot won't, he'll probably tell you I'm lying, even though his incredible feats and everything he's done, and he'll probably only talk about half tonight, the one thing I took away from that conversation was humility, and it was absolutely incredible. And I suppose that speaks for the man himself. Look, that's enough for me. I know we're all very eager to get to the main event, so without further ado, I'd like to welcome the 2024 Lynam Lecturer and recipient, Dermot Somers.
Thanks everybody. It's lovely to see you all here. Absolutely fantastic, the social contacts that I've been making in the last hour. And the first thing would be to make sure that this lapel mic is working, that we're getting the sound right, and that people can hear in every direction of the room. So, how's it going? How is the sound working? People at the back, people out at the two sides. My anxiety was that you'd end up feeling like you were at home watching poor quality YouTube videos. Talk to you about time. So it's lovely to have everybody here in one room. So that's the first picture I want to talk about is the picture that has all of you saying the state of your man. and I sort of agree, but at the same time my intention this evening, if I possibly can every now and then, is to de-romanticize mountaineering, de-glamorize alpinism, and bring it back to what it actually is, which quite often is represented by the jacket there with the zip torn, the big rucksack that's destroying you with the weight of it, the bendy boots with the crampons that are scraping on the wet rock, and all the rest of it. Tom Curtis and myself, sometime back in the late 70s or the early 80s, I'm poor on the chronology, were on the north face of the Eiger. And that previous shot summed up the conditions in which we were climbing. It was extremely wet, very, very hot weather, and the ice and snow up at the top of the mountain was melting and there was water running down everywhere. So that's the waterfall pitch in the ramp. I've actually twisted the picture sideways to let the water drain out of it. And we had to climb that pitch with our rain jackets and our over trousers on. And every time you reached up for a higher hold, the water ran into your sleeves, into the cuffs, down against your body, and came out the cuffs of your trouser legs and filled your boots with cold water, which was very, very enjoyable because I had bad blisters at the time. So there's always a good side to things. Underneath the torn jacket, I was wearing that magnificent Aran sweater, as I said, about 1980, and it had been knitted for me by my absolutely wonderful mother-in-law, Rosie, who had knitted it. And I never told her that I had put it in a drying machine a couple of times and it had shrunk. Now, that actually improved its heat retention qualities. So certainly shrinking them a bit is absolutely no harm whatsoever. That was a bivouac there when I was trying to teach Tom Curtis how to sing, and I was getting over. And then 40 years later, the man still can't sing. But it was a jolly occasion, and we continued on. A day later, our condition had deteriorated substantially, and that's on the Traverse of the Gods. And I think Tom's posture and position and his mien and all the rest of it sums up how we were doing on the very, very wet and dank conditions of the Eiger at that particular time. But we did make it to the top. We made it to the top after considerable difficulty. That's Tom. He was a microbiology PhD student in Leeds University at the time. He was very young, an absolutely brilliant climber. I climbed with him for many years. As a student, of course, he had absolutely no money, and those are his very short-sighted, those are his reading glasses, and he painted them beforehand with an anti-glaze repellent that was used to paint the headlamps of British cars when they travelled on the continent to avoid casting glare into oncoming drivers' eyes. So Tom painted his glasses with that, and they worked really well. Possibly a few years later, we're on top of the Frenia Pillar on the south face of Mount Blanc, and in this particular occasion, I'm the one having problems with my eyewear, cracked one of the lenses in the snow glasses, and I've mended them with Elastoplast out of our very, very skimpy first aid kit. And but really what I noticed there, and what gives me the horrors looking back, is the fact that the salopettes, they were called, in slang terms, they were called sloppyettes, but the salopettes never met the top of the gaiters. So me and any other tall climber, our knees were always bare and exposed, and you could be laying somebody with your knees jammed against the ice. So we always had hairless, bare, scraped, scratched knees. Tom seems to have solved the glasses problem in that particular way. So at least one of us was getting it right. So I'm going back as far as I possibly can now. I've dredged this out of my memory. I actually thought it was my first communion, but I'm told Maeve actually dated it, and she said, no, it's my confirmation. So that was probably the mid to late 1950s. Now, 1950s, not 1850s. That was very much a grey and white. People talk about the 1950s in Ireland being a black and white time. The black and white time was the 1960s, but it was grey and white back in the 1950s. And the thing was that we were all expected to grow up to be priests, and the whole thing was training for priests. And I certainly had the shoes. I mean, that's right. I had the priestly sacerdotal shoes. I never made it to the priesthood, nor anywhere near it. But I did actually try the gear out of the garb in that on Croagh Patrick once, about 10 or 15 years ago, I met a Tridentine priest from France, a young man. Did everything through Latin, wore the full medieval clobber, the whole lot. And he didn't mind me in the least taking a picture to grab my head onto. So at least I knew it was never going to work. And this was the way I turned out instead. In my 20s, I'd never heard of climbing. That was what, 1960s or something like that. I was a diver, sub-aqua was the sport that I was involved in. I had a VSA 650, which is a powerful motorbike. And I used to ride around the coast of Ireland, diving in different places and suffering appalling bad weather. I eventually gave up diving because the weather was and the conditions were so bad. But then shortly after that, I somehow did stumble and fall into climbing. I met climbers. Luckily, you had to have pure chance in those days. There was no social media, there was no YouTube, there were no mobile phones, there was nothing. So you either happened on it by accident. And I noticed that in that picture there, I seem to have cleaned up my image considerably, and there's a sort of a well-shaved, clean-living young man there getting involved in climbing. And those of you who have been around a long time will recognize that there were no frames, there were no wires. The gear at that time was little hexes or big hexes, and everything was on purlon and tape, and there's several moats hanging. Some of you, I should put this as a quiz question, but I don't have anything to give prize. So I'll tell you, that's the step around on fanfare on Glenmalloch, one of those notorious moves that's graded easy, but is actually psychologically very hard. So that's the stage. So what I want to know is what happened between that happy time climbing at Glenmalloch and the misery of this shot many years later. I'm in a shallow grave that has been scooped out of the glacier below the scarp of the Frenne Pillar and about 14,000 feet below some of the hardest climbing at that time in the Alps. Facing into it, actually it's not as miserable. It looks as though I can get sick into a base. I'm actually waiting for some snow to melt and produce some hot water for a brew. So that's how things were. There were high points and low points, but the high points are really prevalent. I wanted to throw a little bit of America in. This is going to be mostly the Alps, this particular talk. But I thought, given what's happening in America now, and America being one of the finest places in the world to climb, I thought I would just celebrate one little episode. And some of you will know that's the Lost Arrow Spire there in Yosemite. And there are two of us on the climb. And we're quite close to the top. That's me there, Beelane, Shane Brogan, who's a doctor in Salt Lake City. Beelane, who's at the top of the Lost Arrow Spire. And one of the things I love about climbing in America is that America is the only place in the world that a visa stipulates that you must eat pancake cakes and maple syrup for breakfast every single day that you're there. And that was all right by me. So I've been back, I've climbed there on many occasions, there are a lot of pancakes. So the Lost Arrow Spire, let's say the top of it is 3,000 feet above the surrounding clay valley there. The figures elude me somewhat, but something like that. So great place to be. I think of the top of the Lost Arrow, I think of it as an island, and I think of the cliff here rising beside us as the mainland. So you get to the top of the island there, you get to the island, and you then have to make your way off it, which is considerably more mind-numbing than actually get to that place. There's usually a rope left in position there, and these days there's always a rope left in position there. And you do an interesting alpine move called a Tyrolean traverse, which I have learned in the Alps through the years before and was quite familiar with. And you move as fast as you possibly can to get across. Shane Brogan coming behind me, sees, I like the picture, the fact that it has his shadow there outlined on the mainland. But the thing about Shane is he'd never done a Tyrolean traverse before, and I told him that there are deer hunters with rifles down in the woods. They are more likely to hit one of us than they are to hit a deer. That being the reputation of American climbers. So Shane moved pretty fast. And this piece that I'm doing here on Yosemite, the idea is to explain that nothing stays the same in climbing. We thought that everything was going to stay exactly as it was when we were climbing. Some years later, somebody asked me to open a copy of the Daily Mail, a thing I wouldn't normally do, I can assure you. And inside there were pictures of a wedding taking place on top of the West Tower. So to me, that was a rude lesson in the fact that things changed very, very quickly. And the bride and bridegroom and the minister are out on the top, and you can see the Tyrolean traverse road left in place. And the bride was in a fabulous wedding dress. So the fact that she posed with the glacier apron slabs behind her, I think it mirrors the wedding dress. Absolutely. I love that picture, even though it came from the Daily Mail. And then here she is. These are actual photographs. I used to make up photographs myself for reasons that don't bear scrutiny, but these are actual photographs here, and the minister, of course, who is not a climber, has been left stranded. And this, her husband here, is a climber, so they're getting themselves off there. But the whole thing was about the pancakes. So you went in the morning and they said, "Will you be setting in today, sir?" And I always say, "You bet, stack them up." So a lot of pancakes were eaten, and I remember them with great joy. So, but a lot of this is going to be about the Alps in the 70s, into the 80s, and so on. A lot of Irish climbers involved in the area. Those of you who are familiar with it will recognize that over on the right-hand side here is Mont Blanc, and the rest are the Chamonix Aiguilles, some of the most magnificent peaks, rock climbs and ice climbs, and so no, the ice is gone, I have to say, in the last few decades. But some of the most magnificent rock climbing anywhere in Europe is on those pinnacles and promontories and ridges there. So I loved that place, absolutely loved it. And for a good few years, it was mainly about the Drew. And from the first time you ever saw the Drew, you were absolutely enchanted by, first of all, by this niche, this eye in the sky, the niche, the snowy niche in the middle of the north face. And then we all were enchanted by Walter Bonatti, the great Italian alpinist of the time, who had climbed a new route on the Drew. He had gone up, if you're following the red dot there, he had gone up the ridge on the right there. He had spent 6 days and 5 nights solo, on his own, climbing the route. And it was a phenomenal achievement to do so, absolutely phenomenal, very high standard, beautiful quality rock. And Walter Bonatti was the absolute star of alpinism for many years. We all loved him. He was a great writer, and his books are terrific. And to this day, if you read Walter Bonatti's books, it puts you in touch with the real fundamental spirit of climbing in magnificent situations and testing your spirit and living up to challenges and so on. So Walter Bonatti was a hero for us, particularly for Irish and Canadian climbers in the 70s and the 80s. We had all read his book, and we loved the whole idea of his climbing and his exploits. So shortly, around that time, maybe 1980, I had come back from an expedition to the Andes, and I persuaded a man called Sean Darby, who was a young doctor at the time working in the Mater Hospital, and a very, very fine climber, persuaded him to come to Chamonix to climb the Bonatti Pillar with me, and it's the left-hand side of this rock wall here. I've marked a climber as we descended down to Flamme Pier. The following day, having ascended, we were looking back at the route, and we could see somebody on the rock that we had climbed the previous day. It's a bad photograph, I know, bleached and burnt out and everything. But one thought it was lovely to actually look back and see the route being climbed. And one of the extraordinary things that strikes me now is the amount of ice that's down there in the vertical glass below the groove. Anybody who goes there these days will know that global warming has removed or diminished that ice considerably. So it's nostalgic to look back at what things used to be like. I was passionately involved with the group for a number of years and climbed several routes on it, but it did end in a sort of an explosive climax on top of the north face in a particular episode that I'm probably going to describe a little bit of here, myself and Tom Curtis. We embarked on the climb, but fairly relaxed about it because we had that season and the season before we had climbed harder routes than the north face of the crew. So we kind of thought, okay, well we know how to do this. This is our thing. And even from the start, as you can see Tom there with the crampons and so on, climbing up a rock, trying to get onto the ice and all the rest of it, it was not terribly easy even from the start. But we kept going, and there was a certain amount of snow that fell every now and then. We didn't mind that. We'd had worse than that before. Kept going up the famous Chamonix granite and the beautiful wide hand-jamming Chamonix cracks and all the rest of it. And at one stage, Tom took 2 lost Belgians in tow. Now that wouldn't have been, I wouldn't have been fully in favour of that, but Tom was always benign, generous, compassionate, and magnanimous. So when we found these 2 climbers stranded in the niche, ill-equipped, out of their depth and so on, only able to function with no food, and they'd already had 2 bivouacs, Tom magnanimously towed them along behind us. We brought them up to the top of the route. Despite the amount of serious cold and miserable climb that was being done, we brought them to the top of the route. And it didn't dampen Tom's spirits in any way. I might have scowled at them every now and then, keep the patience out of the corner of my mouth. But Tom, we got to the top of the route, the quartz ledges, and this almighty lightning storm exploded all around us. We watched it coming across the tops of the Chamonix Aiguille for maybe 2 or 3 hours before that. And cunningly, the 2 Belgians had managed to cop the best bivouac, the best sheltered space on the ledge that was available. And Tom and myself gallantly were sitting out, and we were savagely struck by lightning over and over and over again. And somehow, I mean, we thought from the beginning that we had absolutely I come up with that one to try and convey what we experienced in our story. And in fact, that bears a remarkable resemblance to what was going on. And unbelievably, we survived the absolutely savage storm. And when it died down, we could hear the Belgians clamouring around the corner, and they were looking for the next meal, wondering when the next meal was. They hadn't even at all. So that was the effect of Tom's benign benevolence. We got ourselves down off the Drew that particular time. We were absolutely starving. And we made straight for the mountain railway station of Montauban, which is very high in the mountains. It's a rack railway, and it brings tourists up to considerable height. They get altitude sickness, and they drop their packed lunches into the bins there. So it's always a great source of food. There are some young climbers here now who need to know these things. And I'm actually going to tell you, I'm going to tell you what we have located there in the bin. Tom dived in as far as his waist, and he pulled out 6 full tins of pate de foie gras. He pulled out a pound of chocolate, which lasted us for days afterwards. There were several hard-boiled eggs in it. They had been shelled, and they'd been dropped in Gauloise ash, and there was a certain amount of broken glass inside. But we didn't mind that sort of smoky, slightly crisp texture. We gobbled it all. So that was us sort of finished with the Drew for a while. I did climb the American Direct on one occasion. Myself and Robbie Fenelon climbed it as far as the Jam Block, and that's one of the great days out in the Alps. There's Walter Banati coming down from his first ascent, the solo ascent of the Banati Pillar that I talked about earlier. 1955, wearing the famous camera, the Condoretta, in a leather case around his neck. That became the touchstone of alpinism, alpine climbers who were into photography, and we all were. So the leather case with a good 35mm camera around the neck, we all adopted that from Walter Banati. We read his books and talked about him and shared his exploits. What we particularly loved, and it's reflected in this picture of him, what we particularly loved was that he was an outsider. He was shunned by the institutions. He was a rebel, and he'd been forced into that position because he was ostracized by institutional climbing, the big clubs and the big organizations throughout Italy. He was the finest Italian climber of his time, and all the older climbers and people who were looking for high ranking and so on feared that he would upstage them. He had to be selected for the first huge, the 1954 K2 expedition, which you'll see there at the foot of K2. Bonatti is third from the left. The big man on the left is Compagnoni. He was the sort of senior climber in that expedition, 1954. And around the middle of the back row, slightly occluded by somebody else, Nero Laciadelli there, another famous name, two great men, Compagnoni and Laciadelli. But they were terrified that the glory that was waiting for them reaching the top of K2 would be shadowed or upstaged by Bonatti, Walter Bonatti. So they set him up for failure. And he was ordered to carry oxygen for those two climbers to Camp 9, over 8,000 meters. The oxygen bottles, capsules at the time were over 40 pounds weight, so it was a big load, and Bonatti was the only person capable of carrying it. Him and a local Hunza porter called Medi, who must have been a prodigious climber as well. The two of them made their way up to where they were to meet Compagnoni and Laciadelli at Camp 9, and they weren't there. They had moved the camp secretly out of sight to a different part of the upper slopes of the mountain in order to force Bonatti to go back down, because they felt that he would want to stay at the camp and that he would get to the top before them the following day. And they were not going to have that. They were senior mountaineers, and there was no way they were going to allow an upstart to upstage them like that. So darkness fell. They had no bivouac gear, the Hunza porter, Medi and Walter Bonatti had no bivouac gear and very little useful stuff for a bivouac, but they were forced to spend that night on the side of the mountain without shelter over 8,000 meters, something that was absolutely mythical, in that sense that it was thought to be unimaginable. They both survived, but Medi, the Hunza man, lost many of his fingers and he lost all his toes, so he was a ruined, destroyed man, and he must have been a prodigious mountain man in his time. And Bonatti and himself somehow made their way back down to a lower camp, and Compagnoni and Laciadelli went on to the summit, and that was Italy had made one of the great first ascents of the 8,000 meter peak. Bonatti was vilified and ostracized by Italian mountaineering for almost 50 years afterwards, because he was thought to have been responsible for precipitating a near disaster at the top of the mountain. He spent all those decades trying to clear his name. There were court cases, there were suings, there were people who were counter-sued and so on, but he got nowhere until 50 years later, Laciadelli wrote a book on his deathbed and published, and he acknowledged that Bonatti had been completely correct, had told the truth about everything, and that Compagnoni had set up the situation to undermine Bonatti and to force him into a position where he would have to retreat. So Bonatti's name was cleared, but 50 years later it was too late. He had spent all that time being ostracized by the scene in which he climbed. Mind you, he had many extremely talented climbing friends as well, but it was a very, very sad life. Somewhat summed up by the descent from the friendly pillar. I'm not going to go into this, but some of you will know the particular story, how they got caught in a frightful storm on the Bonatti pillar, and or not on the Bonatti pillar, on the Frene pillar, and Walter Bonatti managed to rescue some of the climbers and get them off the mountain. Several died. In Italy, he was vilified, and they attempted to sue him again for something he had no responsibility for. In France, because there were French climbers involved, he was given the highest award that it was possible to give in France. So his position in Italy continued with vilification, and there was absolutely no solution to it. It's a terrible story of a brilliant man being the most incredible performer of his time, and yet being shunned by the people who resented his abilities. During the years after I started climbing in the Alps, and the various people I climbed with, after we had been involved with the Drew, it gradually began to get a little bit shabby and shoddy and a bit battered and so on, because it's a reasonably low rock peak. So with global warming, the ice inside the rock was beginning to melt and thaw, and the rock started to fall down. There was a big rock fall in 1997, and then in the year 2005, when a lot of parts of the high mountains of the Alps started to fall apart. In 2005, the Banff pillar that he had solo climbed over 6 days and 5 nights in 1955 fell down entirely and left new rock exposed, which has been climbed since in a new route. So things change all the time. So that was the Banff pillar falling down there. It was perfectly captured by a photographer called Robert Drury, and he has copyright to the photographs of that. Quite an episode, and Bonatti himself had given up climbing by then. He became a photojournalist and travelled widely around the world taking pictures and writing accounts for a magazine called Epoca, and so that was his life. He died in the year 2011 at the age 81. And he is remembered heroically in the hearts of those of us who were young climbers at the time and who were inspired by his feats and his activities. For a little bit now, I'm going to talk about people that I climbed a lot with during those years, sometimes in Ireland, sometimes in England, Scotland, America, wherever, usually in the Alps. And you've already met Tom, who was a student of microbiology at the time, passionately third world oriented. He wanted to put his life into developing new systems of sewage, wastewater, and clean water for parts of the world where they didn't have those things. And that's what he has worked on ever since. Today he's a professor of environmental engineering in the University of Newcastle in England, and he has spent his entire academic life trying to solve those issues and making great strides in different parts of the world on providing clean water. His academic title is Dream Fellow. Dream Fellow. I've been in his office and it's written on the front door. He didn't put it there. Dream Fellow, Professor of Environmental Engineering, and he absolutely deserves all the plaudits that he gets. One of the great climbers in the years that I was climbing was Tommy Irving, who has always been, he was so much below the radar, yet to my mind he was the great alpinist of the years that I was climbing. He was the really talented, brilliant climber of that particular time, and the routes that he climbed in Fairhead and in other parts of the world also bear testimony to his quality as a climber. And Tommy is still to the good, and I meet him at the wall regularly, and he's in good form and so on. But he's surprisingly little known, Tommy Irving. So it's great. He and I went to the Alps in winter once. That's the Walker Spur. That's the Walker Spur on the block behind us. And here behind Tommy, that's why I took the picture, is the north face of the Drew in winter. And Tommy, the first time he arrived in Chamonix, he nudged somebody, probably me, and said, "Where's the Drew?" And I brought him, showed him where the Drew was. And the next day, I'd say within a couple of days, he had climbed very significant routes on the Drew. So a terrific character, and I'm delighted to have the opportunity to attribute honour to him because he's terrific. So on the left there is Robbie Fenlon, Dawson Stelfox in the middle, and myself on the right. I was a lot older than they were. I always wanted to be them. I used to say, I want to be them when I grow up. It hasn't happened yet, and I'm not sure why. So Robbie and Dawson and myself worked for many years through the winter, sometimes for several months. We ran and staffed the instruction courses in winter mountaineering and ice climbing and all the rest of it in Scotland. Suffered a great deal of bad weather, but had a lot of very good climbing at the same time. So as people came in here this evening, every now and then somebody almost as old as me would approach me and say, "I was with you in Scotland in 19 such and such," and I would say, "What was the weather like?" Because if the weather was good, they had a great time. If the weather was bad, they didn't have a great time. So the answer, a lot hangs on the answer. When Joss Lynam first started to come to Chamonix and to camp out in the wild in the woods with the rest of us, he was considerably younger than he is. I suppose that's 40, 45 years ago. And Dawson brought a real spirit of imagination and so on with him. The rest of us, including me, were perfectly happy to climb the routes that we could see on the mountains and things that were local to where we were and so on. Dawson came out with the idea of climbing the best sequence of routes throughout the entire span of the Alps. he came out with the idea of the 6 great north faces, which some of you will know Gaston Rebefat, French guide, had put together a few years before that. The idea of a sequence of north faces, one from every area of the Alps, that summed up the nature of climbing throughout those mountains. And Dawson had that idea in his head, and I would never have thought of that. I wouldn't have had the confidence to. I would not have thought that, but somehow I picked up a certain amount of Dawson's spirit from climbing a lot with him. He's here somewhere. And within a very short few years, Dawson himself had climbed all 6 of the north faces that are made famous for the 6 great north faces of the Alps. And that's him on top of the final one that he climbed, which was the north face of the Irish. And no man ever deserved more the accolade of having completed those climbs, because they were difficult times. So good man Dawson, I've lost sight of where you actually are. But somebody pointed, see, Dawson wouldn't dream putting his hand up, other people are pointing at him. The other person in the photograph of the tree was Robbie Fenlon, and Robbie and I climbed a great deal together in a lot of different places, sometimes on ice, sometimes in rock, sometimes in Ireland, sometimes in the Alps. The last route that I climbed with him in the Alps, not many years ago, far less than 10 years ago, was the south ridge of the Salvicum in Switzerland, where he now lives. Absolutely terrific climb, very, very popular and famous among European climbers. Not sure Irish climbers are all that aware of it, and maybe these days it's getting a bit too popular. But Robbie and I climbed it that day, and Robbie somehow, he always had a knack for getting the really good pictures. There were certain pictures in that I was dying to lead, and every time we get to one of them, Robbie would be halfway up the pitch. Neil and I would end up following on the rope. I see Dara laughing up there, knowing exactly what I'm talking about. That seems to happen in certain climbing partnerships. It's a regular thing, but that was a fantastic day out and an absolutely brilliant route. So Robbie and I were in the Alps earlier this summer, and there was a great deal of good climbing going on. So that's somebody else's photograph of the south ridge with the Salvicum there. You can see people silhouetted on it all the way up. It's not my picture. I climbed a good deal as well with Fergal Spain. Fergal Spain is now working in Sudan. He's actually back in Ireland for a very short break at the moment. Fergal, I climbed a lot in the Alps with him and everywhere else, but Fergal, you were laughing all the time while you were climbing with Fergal. I don't know if you can see in that picture, Fergal is splitting his sides laughing on that route on, I think, Craigley Wall on Tremallow, and he's having an absolutely great time. And I'm fit to drop the ropes probably with laughter as well. So it's great to have a picture that has somebody actually laughing in it, and thanks to Fergal for that. Macdara O'Graham is here somewhere. I think I see him up there with a big grin on his face, and people pointing at him as well. We've climbed a lot. We're still climbing together. We were in the Alps earlier this summer. I was much too tired for the plans that he had in mind, but nonetheless it went reasonably well. And Macdara keeps me in touch with music and singing as well. He comes from a great traditional singing background, and singing has always been huge in my life. And the generation of climbers I come from, singing was a big thing. There was none of that thing of having little machines that you plug in and headphones and all, sealing yourself off from other people. We sang, and we had hundreds of songs. Frank Nugent would know exactly what I'm talking about there. Yeah, there's Macdara. I always like to do justice to Emmett Goulding. I mean, there's something. Emmett absolutely bestrode Irish climbing like a colossus. An absolutely lovely man that we were all deeply attached to, and that we still miss right up to the present day. And that's Emmett's route sarcophagus and Glendalough. That was a testing point for most of the climbers here. Making your first ascent of sarcophagus was a big moment in all our climbing lives. So there's Macdara high on sarcophagus there. As much as anything, as I say, I'm trying to do justice to Emmett's memory. The person who has been with me in pretty much everywhere that I have climbed and trekked and travelled and wandered and got lost and so on, never got lost due to Maeve's presence, is the exact opposite. But we have climbed and walked and everything all over the world, and our local mountains, because we live in Drogheda, our local mountains are the Mournes, seen in beautiful snowy conditions there at the moment. I mean, that's the way to get the Mournes. Absolutely fabulous. So we climbed, maybe myself was there a few days ago on an absolutely beautiful day. We've done a lot of rock climbing is not necessarily made chosen idea, but she has climbed far more, on far more serious routes than she ever intended to, and has done extremely well. And I think she loves it, and that's the way that's the way it goes. So it's an absolutely perfect partnership. And we've also been several times in the Himalayas, and a great person with crampons on, and pair of ice axes and all the rest of it. So we've had absolutely fantastic times, and we're still going to Spain all the time. Climbing, that's Maeve's sister Ursula McPherson. Many of you will know Ursula. She ran this organisation at one stage, Mountaineering Ireland, and so on, was president. What do you do, the chairman or whatever it is that people become chairperson. So that was Ursula, and many of you will know her. So we climbed together in Spain quite a bit, and they're great times. Ursula also facilitates me if there's something that I really want to get up and I shouldn't be on, like this, the Gibona ridge on the Cima Grande, the Lavaredo, which is this ridge here that goes up the left-hand side of the biggest of the Trecima di Lavaredo, up the left-hand ridge of it here. Must be, I don't know, somewhere between 16 and 20 pictures on it. Like it's a lot of climbing, a long day. And Ursula and I did that, I don't know, was it 3 or 4 or 5 years ago? One of the great, I really wanted to climb that route, and Ursula was delighted to come along on it. And regularly, as you climb the ridge there, you're looking across onto the north face of the Cima Grande. And Dawson and I had climbed the route that goes up the middle of that, I don't know, could have been 40 years ago. Let's say 40 years for sort of an even number. So to be on the ridge at the side of it, looking across, was absolutely fantastic. So I'd like to thank Ursula for opportunities like that, which I hope will continue. Now, I'm in very exalted company in that particular picture. That's me there on the right. And on the left is Calvin Torrens. You really need to say very little about Calvin Torrens. I always think of him as the king of Fairhead. But in the years that I was climbing in the Alps, Calvin was always around as well. Absolutely terrific climber. And the man in the middle is the great and unforgettable Emmett Goulding. And you can see he's carrying the camera there against his chest, 35mm camera, very good quality, takes good pictures, took good pictures, and that is Emmett Goulding. And that's the Walter Bonatti legacy again, with the photography and all the rest of it. Emmett, absolutely terrific climber. This was very early, maybe the second year I'd been in the Alps or something like that. So I thought I knew a lot, and the two boys were keen to point out to me that I did not know a lot. And they succeeded in convincing me that I knew very, very little indeed, and they enjoyed that greatly. And they relished it. So we had put plastic bags from the supermarket around our boots, our leather boots. And really, we didn't realise we had invented the plastic boot. I didn't realise we had cashed in on it. We wouldn't be doing well like that, but that was it. My only talent at that time, second year in the Alps maybe, was availability. Availability is a great, great quality. And I have lived off availability for most of my climbing life. Somehow I'm there when you want to do a route. And somehow I'm there, and very often, that's all you need. There's somebody who's available, and very often we get up the things that we want to get up. I mean, the people who aren't there would never get up the roof, they're not there. So availability is an absolutely tricky quality. We were on our way to the north, let me get this right, that's the Brenda face of Mont Blanc. Absolutely towering, magnificent face. I see Neil Wilson looking at him there. He was there about 2 or 3 months ago, a couple of months ago, in that particular area. We, myself and Calvin at the time, were on our way to do the, what is that route called with you? Route Major, thank you. I was just checking to see how many people were waiting. Only one person was waiting. So we were on our way to do Route Major, which was way, way outside my league. And Calvin, Emmett and Harry O'Brien, who took the photograph of the three of us. Harry couldn't be here tonight, but sent us all his best wishes. Harry and Dermot were going to try the Pear, another magnificent route that goes up that huge, towering, colossal face there on the side of Mont Blanc. And what you have to remember here is that you climb all of that in the dark, at night, because that's when it's cold and the snow and ice is frozen in place. And this enormous gully that comes down here, this enormous couloir, can be frozen, and you're not getting the avalanches that come down, and hopefully when you cross the bottom of it. So we set off on that, and I've darkened the picture there so that you get the idea of fellas climbing in the dark. Mind you, it was much, much darker than that. And half the time I had no idea where I was simply following the others. And again, giving you just a bit of light. Part of the significant climbing on the Route Major is these famous ice ribs, very thin, narrow ice ribs, high up on the face. And they can be in poor condition, they can be in good condition. Everything at that time seemed to me to be in poor condition because I was in poor condition. So in the middle of the night, 2 or 3 o'clock in the morning, I forced Calvin to stop. He was, I was tied onto the rope with him, and I could not go another step without rehydration. So I insisted, and Calvin said, but we're on the ice rib. We can't stop here. I can't do his accent, by the way. So I insisted, I couldn't go any further. So I took out, we kicked steps in the very narrow ridge, took out a gas stove, got it lit, and put another gas stove beside it in case that one ran out, and the 2 gas stoves caught fire. And they flared up, and we were standing on an extremely narrow snow ridge. Nothing, we couldn't run away, we couldn't kick them down because Emmett and Harry were down below us. It wasn't that we were afraid of hitting them, we just didn't want them to know that it was us that kicked them. So we stood beside the stoves in absolute horror, knowing that we were going to be blown to shreds at any stage. The plume of flame rose higher and higher and higher. And eventually it dawned us, at least we weren't cold any longer. So we started to lean into the flames, and gradually I looked across at Calvin, and he was holding his hands up to the flames. And I was doing the same, and we were getting those pains in your fingers when the heat circulation starts to return. So that was it. It didn't explode. The flames died down. We carried on. We got to the top of the route. And let me just draw attention. This is geographically correct, by the way, because that is the Walker Spur. That pillar in the background is the Walker Spur on the Grand Terrace, the Grand Terrace. And I'm going to talk about that in a sort of roundabout way now. I have to address Queen here. How are we doing time-wise and so on? Okay. Okay, so the Walker Spur, one of the great north faces of the Alps there. Huge, colossal, one of the last of the big north face routes. We climbed 1938, not by Bonatti, but by another famous Italian who didn't have anything like the charisma of Bonatti. Cassini is a magnificent climber, but you don't put photographs of him up and so on because he looks like a fella that you find on the building site or something like that. So the glamour in climbing, unfortunately, always is cultivated. So I was heading up there with Tom Curtis. Again, we were reasonably comfortable. The weather was good. That's a winter picture there. And I'm just putting it in so you can see the angle of the climbing. Huge, huge, huge route. And we were looking forward to it, to climbing it in good weather. So there it is, and you're starting down here somewhere, making your way up all this route. I don't know, thousands of feet. Good Lord, I don't have to put a figure on it. It's absolutely enormous. Now, I knew anyway, because my Irish climbing history has always mattered to me, that sometime in the 1970s, earlier on, Anthony Latham from Dublin and Richard Dean, as he was known then, from County Meath, Stackallan on the River Boyne, had made an early Irish ascent, if not the first ascent, we're not sure, of the Walker Spur. And here they are coming down the Italian side, having crossed the top of the mountain and coming down. I was a climber in Dalkey Quarry at the time, heard the story about them, and what impressed me most was their entire food supplies were 19 Mars bars. So I love that gave the whole thing a sense of scale for me. And years and years later, Richard Dean, the other climber, became a great, lifelong friend of mine, Richard Dean. And in his later years, Richard O'Neill Dean, because he married Frida O'Neill. So Richard O'Neill Dean there climbing very snowy conditions on the Walker Spur sometime in the 1970s. Tom and I had it in very pure rock conditions, which was great. And there's Richard as well. He gave me these pictures, slides many years ago. I cleaned them up and sharpened them a bit and so on. There's Richard in the 75-metre D'Edra and so on. So that picture comes from a long time back with a very powerful Irish descent of women. At that time, the Walker Spur was known as probably the finest climb in the world. And that was always the thing you came back from it, and people said, "Is it the finest climb in the world?" And you said, "Yeah, of course it is." But that's debatable. So there's Richard in Chamonix, having returned from climbing the Walker Spur. Now, it is very, very sad to have to acknowledge that in October of this year, Richard died while climbing alone, solo, in the New Zealand Alps, where he lived in New Zealand. He was descending from the summit of Mount Darshiak on his own, and Mountain Rescue afterwards remarked that there seemed to be very dangerous snow conditions at the top of the descent. So Richard obviously fell through a cornice or something at that time and was killed at the age of 70. Very, very much missed by those of us who always admired him for being such an extraordinary climber, a brilliant psychotherapist, or so his patients said anyway. Very fine writer. People talk about Irish climbing writers. Richard had an absolutely beautiful skill with subjective descriptions of landscape. Absolutely brilliant at that, and his writing should endure and should be made available to people. He spent a good number of years here in Ireland, and that's when he and I climbed a lot together and so on. And he worked with myself and Maeve at the time, was working in Tiglin when it was the National Outdoor Adventure Centre and so on. And Richard worked there as an instructor. He worked with us in Scotland many, many years with the winter climbing and so on. Eventually, in 1987, he and Frida emigrated to New Zealand and spent the rest of their lives there. We invited him back in 1993 to join the Irish Everest expedition. Richard was always the tallest man in Ireland, and we put him standing in the hole there in the glacier behind him to try and get him slightly down to our and leave him dead. He still judged about above us. That's myself and Dawson Delphos and Frank Nugent standing, and Robbie Freeman there standing in front of Richard, and we still couldn't hide him. So he was on that successful 1993 Everest expedition. I just want to mention again his quality as a writer. It's not that he was hugely prolific or anything like that, but the pieces that he wrote, particularly about ski mountaineering in New Zealand, which he took up with great diligence, and he pioneered a new high mountain traverse in the New Zealand Alps, and people there report that it's of a similar quality to the haute route in the European Alps from Mont Blanc to Mont Blanc or the other way around. So Richard wrote a good deal about that, and we're going to try and make that somehow available to Irish climbing readers and so on. So here we are about to start climbing the Walker Spur. I'm actually going to read a page, and I'm going to just flick through the slides as I read this page, which is sort of a description of that particular episode for Tom Curtis and myself. Now I just have to remember the difficulty here is doing two things at the same time. Flicking the slides on, there's Tom on his way up the start. So, the Walker Spur. You reach a point at times in a great adventure when you understand a truth more fundamental than the action itself. You understand why you're doing it. You know that it's not only a physical act, but one that is deeply linked with creativity and freedom. You know that the spirit is being expanded in directions it will not reach in other circumstances. I emerged from the 75-metre D'Edra corner at sunset, a mountain dancer in my own head, floating up a slab as if on wings. Whine of a bullet. The stone shot past my face, between my body and the rock, out between my legs. Had it struck me in that instant, I was at the peak of my existence. It missed, and I've been falling slowly ever since. We hacked out a shelf, space for two, stove between us, legs dangling, a view down into the chaos of the glacier. Sunset was a dream of light and shadow among the pinnacles of Les Aiguilles. At the final moment, as the sun sank from sight, we saw a flash of emerald on the horizon, the elusive green flash. I never saw it before or since, but how often is one perched at altitude in perfect weather, focused on the skyline at the moment of incandescence? That was the best bivouac of my life, an experience often rated from bad to worst. Not a hint of threat, the night sky nailed with stars. Secured to solid rock, we passed the night like poets on a park bench, listening to the creaks and rumbles of the world as the mountains flexed with cold. Awake a while, a spell of sleep, the cold bench flying through the sky, spinning among the stars, resting again on the crest of the ridge in the half-light of a new morning. That's not a bad way of actually getting through a description. Like, you don't have to mention everybody else or what we ate or anything like that. I must try that again some other time. So that was the Walker's Spur, and I'll pause on that slide and have a consultation with Queen here. How are we doing?
Keep going.
Well, no, people would say, Dawson would be saying that if Dawson said keep going, that's to set me up, because people would be saying after, people would be saying after, when Dawson did his talk, he kept it nice and short. The people's requirements for our Dermot is the usual thing of going on and on and on. So I'm pretty happy to end at that point. Greenland is a most authoritative person. I tell you, there's no. Anyway, singing there in advanced base camp in the Himalayas, in wherever we were. Anyway, Mike Barry, who's here this evening, waiting to sing the Long Black Veil. He'd be the next person up. We all sang. We had a lot of songs, and we might as well have called the report of that expedition the Wrong Book Songbook. Which was on the wrong place here, because we did more singing than anything else. The weather was dreadfully bad. Everything was in avalanche conditions. Joss was the leader. Joss Lynam was the leader of that expedition. There he is on the left. And Donald O'Murrough, who's here, and I want to point out to him that he is the most acerbically funny climber I have ever climbed with, and look forward to doing more of it, because that man knows how to slag you and cut the ball. See, that's Donald there sizing. I was obviously taking a picture, and Donald is sizing me up for a mock and put down. Anyway, so we were there in Tibet to climb this particular mountain in the middle here, which is Changsi, over 25,000 feet high, absolutely enormous peak, maybe 7,700 meters, colossal. But behind it rises the north face of Everest. Now, I have to say that we took no notice whatsoever of Everest when we were there to climb it. We addressed it, and yet the route we had in mind and had organised everything was running with avalanches the entire time. There were massive amounts of snow falling down. It was dreadfully dangerous. So we spent our time singing and circling around the mountain in deep snow, trying to find our way onto Changsi, which never happened, and that was okay. So back again, let me see now, where am I here? We're back again, and Everest was there. And obviously in 1993, we were back, some of us were back in the exact same place to climb the North Ridge on Everest, the Irish Expedition, 1993, North Ridge of Everest, forever associated with Joss Lynam's successful gaining of the summit. That's our advanced base camp. And at the beginning, we thought, oh my God, we're in for weltering quantities of snow again. There was a Chinese-Taiwanese expedition there when we arrived at advanced base camp. We're at 20,000 feet there. That's my tent there, trying to get as low down the side of the mountain as possible. Richard O'Neill Dean, whom I talked about, and myself had the ability to acclimatise quite quickly at altitude. So we ended up carrying loads for the Chinese expedition in return for our expedition using their fixed ropes up to the North Col, which of course is a line that goes straight up this icy precipice of this 1,000-metre cliff of ice here. So Richard and I carried several loads for the Chinese. We call them Chinese takeaways, what else? And we carried them onto the North Col and dumped them at a Chinese tent. Now, there wasn't a whole lot in the loads that I carried, I have to say. But we showed willing nonetheless, and we had done our bit. But when I got there to the North Col, there's some of the tents. There's an Irish tent mixed with those, and here we are on our way trying to crack the enigma of the North Ridge. When I got to that particular point with the Chinese takeaway on my back, I was back where I had got to in 1987 on the Changsey expedition. Shane Olin and I had spent a night at that particular place, but we'd come from the south side of the North Col, and we dropped down the other side. But I got a lung condition there. I was diagnosed as pleurisy, which is a condition of the pleura, the outer membrane of the lung. And it was extremely painful, and I barely managed to make my way down onto the East Romney Glacier on the other side, where Joe Scott had an expedition, and we were fed fried eggs and so on by his crew. Made our way down there anyway, and back again in 1993, and on the North Col, I got pleurisy again. It was as if the infection had been lying in the snow for 6 to 7 years, like a demented psychotic hitchhiker, waiting for me to come that way again. I jumped on board as soon as I arrived. So there I was, crippled and bad lung again. But before that, I managed to carry as far as Camp 2 here, which is at 25,500 feet, something like that, 7,700 meters. So at least I got to that height on the North Ridge of Everest, and shared in some of the difficulties of the route. I had another role on that expedition, let me tell you. I was there for a very important reason. Michigan and Payne did a Lauer and Weld the Aaron Trust in Hogshead. And we had a lot of commitments to sponsors and so on, and radio and television communications in Ireland that needed to be fulfilled and fundraising done and so on. So I was partly on the expedition to discharge some of those responsibilities to our Irish connections, as well as I have to say, might be one of the more articulate members of the expedition in English as well. Where's Joss? So that was another reason for being there. But when Dawson headed off on that last stage, the last day of possible climbing on the North Ridge of Everest, and he's heading off towards, I think, the second step there at that particular point. When he headed off, I was down at base camp with Dr. Kathy Fleming sitting beside me, looking after my pleurisy, and she thought, and probably was right, that I had a blood clot in one of my extremities as well. So I was being looked after, but I was dealing with a certain amount of communications. We had a phone, but we also had radio. So there was radio contact with Joss and talk. And when Joss got to the summit of Everest and took this selfie of himself at 8,000, and he said, Dermot, I'm at 8,800. The altimeter is reading 8,848 meters. And I addressed him in Irish, in a passionate declamation of our joy at the fact that he was on far of our jar going in no man's sin agus for Irish Schneeve a graph agus go around Jim Hanway agus go mer tip when of the war and year with appreciation stuff. And Dawson, the reason he looks a bit puzzled there. So we'll say no more about that. This is a satellite photograph. I have coming towards the end. This is a satellite photograph. I like this. It distorts things a little bit, but that's the North Ridge there at 23,000 feet. So I've been there twice. Once coming up that side, and once coming up this side, or twice or 3 times coming up the left-hand side there. So I'm really pleased with that. And I put together this little mandala. I always think of it as like a Tibetan mandala. Going up the West Rongbuk Glacier in 1987, going up the East Rongbuk Glacier in 1993. And somehow the pattern represents to me those beautiful patterns, mandala, that the Tibetan monks tend to make with sand and probably with snow as well. So I treasure the memory of having, I'll never be higher than that again, that's for sure. So on the descent in 1987, the last hurdle here now, I think you're blaming Quayle for this, on the descent, I was suffering so badly from lung problems that I forced a bivouac on the way down, but I had a really bad sleeping bag. Shane Oren had a really good one, so we slept through the night. We were on the moraine at maybe 20,000 feet or something like that. And I opened my eyes at dawn, and above me, 100 feet up in the air, was a lammergeier floating around against the dawn sky, circling and circling and dipping down a little bit, and obviously surveying and recognizing that I had been left out as a Tibetan skyberry. And he circled and circled, and somehow I pulled myself back together and survived, and Shay and I fought our way down. So we left a disappointed Tibetan vulture behind us, maybe on some future occasion. So that's the Tibetan vultures there, and they've obviously have found something there to relish, so we leave them to it. We have a video clip here, if it plays, and people ask me about diets and food and exercise and so on, so I give you a minute of this.
Tá daoine a hiúlann san an phléisiúir nuair a stoppen siad. Ní hagam se leis an bhústar a cloistear faoi eistí bia sa látá neamháin. Ní féidir freochtán lán de bhágún, ispíní, ivacha, potó gubas bháin, iad lig freocht in im a bhóile. Sní sin péad eile tar fáil.
So that's it. And thank you very, very much. It can be, you can harangue, you can complain, you can do all sorts of things.
Dermot, when we heard that on Clinic that morning, was that live?
Oh, I think so.
Was it?
Yeah, I think so.
I remember your players.
Thank you.
Question, Dermot. The theme of this is really what
Oh, you're
has
going to
changed.
slag me. You are a bit
Relax, we're taking them. We're friends here.
That's the theme, that's why I'm so worried. No, but the theme is kind of largely what has changed over your career as a climber.
Yeah.
Can you kind of relate to us if anything exists that has not changed, that's impermanent about climbing, regardless of when and how long it's been?
I absolutely can. I have always climbed for the people that I climb with. It's always been the people who bring the mountains to life for me. It's always been that. And I've been very fortunate in having climbed for whatever, nearly 50 years, with people whose company was a joy and continues to be a joy. I climbed with you, Paul, as you well remember. And that was always hilarious.
We had lots of fun.
Yeah, we had lots of fun. We absolutely did. So that is the thing that has never changed. The most important thing is the company that you keep. It brings the mountains to life. So thanks for that.
Anybody else?
How you doing, Dermot?
Good man.
That was an unbelievable presentation. We were just interested in hearing about the transition from, we all climb in Boardman Quarry, the three of us, but Dalkey Quarry to the north face of the Drew seems like a big uplift. How did you get there? It just seems quite amazing, to be honest. So, could you tell us the story?
I already did. There's no way of going back, no way I'm going back on that because there's lightning the top of that. The climbing is the same anywhere and everywhere. It's the same. You know, you're reaching up to handholds. There might be water coming down your sleeve, there might not. There might be snow under your crampons. It doesn't matter. Climbing is the same everywhere. You love climbing. Most of the people here absolutely love climbing. That's all there's to it. You know, a pitch that's 1,000 feet up some steep piece of rock is no different to the same pitch at sea level. So I think that's pretty much it. You're too far away from me to engage with, so.
Anybody else?
Come on, a bit of slagging. John O'Callaghan, look at your hair. You have it all stored up inside.
What are you against Solzhenitsyn?
I actually didn't hear it yet.
One second. What have you against Solzhenitsyn?
Absolutely.
There's one for you.
Absolutely nothing. I mean, I think that scene on the building site in the prison camp where he starts to lay the blocks. I mean, I worked on all the building sites for years, and that whole thing of going in on a frosty morning and having to pick up blocks that were icy, and Mike Keeson know about this as well. You were never supposed to lay areas up there. You were never supposed to lay blocks at lower than 4 degrees centigrade. My God. We used to put washing up liquid in the sand and cement in order to make it run and to get to, it would survive temperature below that. But Solzhenitsyn's description in A Day in the Life of that working on the building site is just the most incredible piece of writing. It still lights up my life. Got to do.
Okay, we have a question in the back here.
We all see the excellence on you as a mountaineer. I would equally commend that you are equally brilliant as a writer. In reference to the previous question, I suggest that they read your short story of Paul II in one of your books.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Much appreciated. Okay, the questions are running a bit thin on the ground as far as I can see. So,
We have one more question.
how do you Browning it all the way from Drogheda? Good, remind yourself. He's used to standing up in court.
Thank you so much for an inspiring presentation. I'm kind of curious about how you managed to get away to climb so much, how you kind of organised your life to be in the mountains so much.
Well, Maeve was away with me most of the time. Like we have organised our lives that way, you know, to be responsible, civic-minded citizens in the country we love, but to get out of it as often as we can. Yeah, I can't give you a philosophical answer.
Okay, I think I'll hand you over to David Pollard as chairperson. He'll say.
Thanks, Queen. Dermot, thanks a million. That was absolutely fantastic. Maybe we just give another round of applause. I suppose, as always, attending these events is a real pleasure. I suppose they've become a really important part of our calendar at Mountaineering Ireland, and I suppose looking around at the enormous crowd tonight, I have to say on behalf of the staff and the board of Mountaineering Ireland, it is really gratifying to see the amount of support and interest we're getting in these events. So give yourselves a round of applause. In a couple of moments, I'm going to hand over to Joss's grandson, Connor, to actually make the award. But just first of all, I'd just like to say a few words about the award itself and the significance award. The Lynam Award itself was launched in 2011, so I think this is year 14. And I suppose the award was launched to recognise and celebrate the enormous contribution that Joss made to the development of the sport, to all mountain sports in Ireland, and I suppose to the creation and the formation of a community of people with a passion for things mountain. Joss's interest in things mountain were vast. He was obviously a mountaineer, as you've heard, an alpinist. He was also an active hill walker, climber, orienteering. I think he was also very much involved in. And I don't want to, I'm not even going to try to summarise his career in mountaineering, but to say that he was involved in a large, I suppose he was really involved in the formation of mountaineering as we know it today. He was the founder member of the Irish Mountaineering Club more than 70 years ago, and I believe he was one of the key instigators of the formation of the FMCI, which was the Federation of Mountaineering Clubs of Ireland, which is the precursor to our organisation. So, and I know in that role you would have interacted very much with yourself, Dermot. I know you were very much involved in that also at that time. And I know Helen said to me earlier that she explains to younger staff in the office that all of the work they do within Mountaineering Ireland all happened within Joss's attic back in the day. So, as I say, I'm not going to keep you much longer, but I just wonder, I suppose, just to say that, if I find the right piece of paper now, just to say that I suppose the success of this event, the great support for it, and I suppose the year-on-year increase we see in the attendance of these events, together with the host of amazing recipients of the award over the 14 years, I think together that really forms a perfect tribute to Joss's contribution and to Joss's legacy. Before I'm nearly coming to the end. But before I finish, there's a number of people I'd like to thank. Firstly, I'd like to thank Dean and Quillan and all of the staff of Mountaineering Ireland who organised this event and so many other events. So it's really without them. I'd like to recognise the role of the Lynam Committee. These are the people who I suppose, advise the board on who the award should go to. And I know Noel and Ursula and Patrick and Liam and Ruth, I think, are all members of that committee, and I suppose to thank you for your work on that. I'd like to thank the members of the Lynam family who every year support us and come out in large numbers, and we're going to get Conor up shortly. And I suppose finally I'd like to thank all of you because without the support and without the enormous support and the magnificent turnout that we see year on year, this event wouldn't be half as special as it is. So I'd like to thank all of you for your support. So that's really all I was going to say. I'm going to just ask Conor to pop up, and Dermot, just one photograph, okay? Dermot gave me strict instructions beforehand, no fuss. So. The last thing for me, just to remind you, we're going to the Lombard after. I don't know how we're going to fit all this crowd in, but you're more than welcome to join us for a pint.